welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Pride and Prejudice. Chapter 9, Jane's Heart is Broken. After a silent breakfast, Elizabeth and the younger girls walked to Meryton to see Mr. Wickham. Elizabeth was pleased to see him. "Why did you not attend the ball?" she asked. "I thought you would have enjoyed it." He explained to Elizabeth they had voluntarily decided to avoid the ball at Netherfield as to not cause problems for Mr. Darcy. His sensitivity increased her affectionate feelings for him. Soon after they arrived home from town, Elizabeth looked for Jane. She wanted to see her sister alone and to tell her all the news of Wickham, but it wasn't to be. Jane was too upset. "Jane, whatever's the matter?" asked Elizabeth anxiously. "I have received a letter from Caroline Bingley. It says that Bingleys have left Netherfield and are on their way to London. They have no plans to be here at present." "It is evident he won't return this winter," Jane said sadly. "I don't understand why he's doing this. There is more," she added. "Caroline writes that Georgiana Darcy is a most accomplished young lady. She hopes that Bingley will marry her." "I must have a different opinion," stated Elizabeth. "I think Miss Bingley knows that her brother is in love with you, but she wants him to marry Miss Darcy. She hopes that by keeping him in London she will convince him to forget all about you." "Oh, Jane, we are not rich enough or grand enough for Miss Bingley. Caroline thinks if her brother marries Darcy's sister, and then she may have a chance to marry Darcy herself. Her plan might even succeed if Miss de Bourgh were out of the way. But don't worry, Jane. No one can alter his love for you," Elizabeth consoled her sister. While Jane pined over Bingley, Mr. Collins still moped around. Elizabeth was very grateful for the presence of her friend Charlotte, who always engaged him in conversation. Charlotte's kindness, however, had another motive. She wanted to marry Mr. Collins herself. Charlotte's persistence was quickly rewarded. Just days after being rejected by Elizabeth, Mr. Collins had proposed to Charlotte, and Charlotte, whose only desire was to have a house of her own, was happy to accept. Sir William and Lady Lucas, her parents, were delighted with the match. Since they had no money to leave her, Mr. Collins' position made him a most eligible match for their daughter. Lady Lucas even began calculating how many more years Mr. Bennet was likely to live. After all, one day, Longbourn estate would belong to Mr. Collins. Charlotte was more than satisfied. She knew that Mr. Collins wasn't a serious man and that his company was rather annoying. But the marriage would give her a position in life that was satisfactory enough for her. Charlotte was content. Jane and Elizabeth, meanwhile, had little time for Charlotte or Mr. Collins. They were more concerned about Bingley's sudden departure. It was rumored that he had not returned to Netherfield for Christmas, a report that angered Miss Bennet, and which she insisted was a scandalous lie. Even Elizabeth began to fear for Jane's happiness. She worried that Bingley's sisters would keep him away. The united efforts of these two feeling sisters and Darcy's friend, assisted by the attractions of Miss Darcy, might be enough for him to get Jane. As for Jane, her anxiety was even more painful than Elizabeth, but she hid her true feelings. Still, an hour seldom passed in which Miss Bennet did not talk of Bingley, or remind Jane that she had been treated badly. It needed all of Jane's patience to bear her mother's harsh words. In fairness, Mrs. Bennet was really in a pitiful state. The very mention of Bingley threw her into despair, and she heard talk of him wherever she went. Moreover, the sight of Charlotte Lucas was oppressive to her. As her likely replacement in the Longbourn house, she regarded Charlotte with jealous hatred. She complained bitterly to her husband. "My dear, do not give way to such gloomy thoughts," he comforted her. "Let us hope for better things. Maybe I will survive you." This gentle irony did not console Mrs. Bennet, who left the room to avoid her husband's remarks. The inheritance preoccupied Mrs. Bennet, but not her daughters. They were too busy thinking of their own lives and what their futures might hold. Jane's situation was most upsetting. "Will he return to Hertfordshire as he promised me?" she asked herself. "Or have I lost him forever?" When Miss Bingley's next letter arrived, it put an end to all Jane's doubts. The first sentence explained that they were settled in London for the winter. Hope was gone. Caroline even had the gall to boast her brother's affection for Miss Darcy. Elizabeth heard this and fumed. Her heart was divided between concern for her sister and resentment against the others. That Bingley was really fond of Jane, she never doubted. As much as she liked him, she could not think of him without anger. Why was he such a slave to his sister and friends? Why had he sacrificed his happiness with Jane? Jane refused to blame Bingley, but Elizabeth did. There seems to be a shortage of merit and sense in some people. I can cite two recent examples. Bingley's departure and Charlotte's marriage, she noted. Mr. Collins is a conceited, narrow-minded fool. No self-respecting woman would ever marry such a man. Can Charlotte be in her right mind? You mentioned two instances, Lizzie, said Jane. I don't blame Bingley. We must not expect a young man to always act sensibly, responsibly. My vanity deceived me. Women think admiration means more than it does. And men make us think that it does, Elizabeth cried. Do you think his sisters influence him? Asked Jane. I'm sure they only wish for his happiness. They may wish many things besides his happiness, countered Elizabeth. They may wish he increases wealth, so they may wish him to marry a rich girl. If they believed he loved me, they would not try to part us, said Jane. If he loved me, they could not succeed. That kind of talk upsets me. I can't take much more. Elizabeth respected Jane's wishes. From then on, they rarely mentioned Bingley's name. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.